This is a moment in Jewish history. I am your host, Ben Bresky, and with me today is Rabbi Kalman Flaks. You are at the Netzach Yisrael yeshiva right now, and many people in Jerusalem know you as Keith, your English name. You host many Shabbat meals, you're a tour guide, and you teach classes there at Netzach. And there's a fascinating history about this yeshiva and the rabbi that founded it and the Rehavia neighborhood of Jerusalem. Kalman, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ben, for having me. It's a great pleasure.
There's a lot to cover, but there's this big, old, historic building on the corner in the Rehavia neighborhood, and you're sitting there right now, and it's founded by this fascinating rabbi that I never heard of before, but there's a whole backstory. Maybe we should start with Rabbi Gutman.
Rabbi Yisroel Zev Gustman, who I have the great pleasure of learning and teaching at his beautiful Beis Medrash. His spirit, I think, really embodies this yeshiva. Rabbi Gutman was a genius. He lived in the early 20th century in Vilna, and he was actually appointed at a very young age to be the Av in Vilna, which was like the greatest court in all of Europe. So he must have been a real genius to be at age 18. He was a tremendous Talmid Chacham. Actually, the story goes, he would humbly say that he happened to have a Chiddush. That Chiddush was shared with the Beis Din, and that helped solve a big aguna situation that they were struggling with. And he was appointed soon afterwards as part of the Beis Din. So we're talking someone who had a great, great future as one of the leaders of European Jewry. And then the Holocaust broke out. And he ended up, through many, many, many miracles, surviving the Holocaust. His wife survived. Somehow, miraculously, though, he was able to survive the war and rebuild his life, and eventually ended up coming here to Rehavia and founding the yeshiva. And it's someone who I could tell you dozens of stories about, but it's someone who I felt very connected to. And it was one of the reasons, actually, why we ended up setting up camp and learning in this Beis Medrash. If you want, Ben, I'll tell you actually the first story I heard about Rav Gutman, which got me connected to him. You curious?
Yes.
Okay, great. So when I was 18, my Rebbe told me the following story. Rav Gutman, once a week on Thursdays, would teach a long, 4-hour shiur to give people a taste of what real Torah was. He was maybe the greatest Talmid Chacham around. He wanted to give regular Balei Batim who didn't necessarily have time to learn all day, but he wanted to give them a taste of the Torah that was lost in the Holocaust. And one of the regulars in this shiur was named Robert Aumann. Now, Robert Aumann later became famous because he actually won the Nobel Prize in economics, but he would learn every week. He would come to the shiur. Unfortunately, in 1982, Robert Aumann had a son, Shlomo. He died in that Lebanon war, fighting for Am Yisrael. And so the Rosh Yeshiva decided to bring the whole yeshiva, it's called Yeshivas Ramelis, after the original Beis Medrash they had in Europe, and bring them to the funeral. The whole yeshiva to show their respects. And as Rav Gutman is walking out of the cemetery, he looks around and says, "They're all holy. Everyone's holy." And the people around said, "Everyone? Really? Even the secular guys?" And he says, "Yes, Kulam Kadoshim. They're all holy." And he decided he'd bring the whole yeshiva to the Shiva house. And so at a certain point, Rabbi Aumann was a little uncomfortable. He said, "Rebbe, you've done enough. Everyone can go back to the yeshiva. I don't want to mevatel anyone's Torah." And Rav Gutman stood up, and he spoke both in Yiddish and Hebrew. He wanted to make sure everyone understood. And he said, "Listen, I have to share something that I haven't shared with others. When I was escaping the Nazis, I had a child. His name was Meir, and he was the sweetest boy you'll ever know. And we tried to escape the Nazis in every which way. But at the end of the day, they grabbed him from my hands, and they killed him in front of my eyes. And it was the hardest day you could imagine. And you should know what's happening right now in Shamayim. Your Shlomo is coming up to the heavens. And my Meirke, my little boy, is greeting him up there in the heavens. And my mayor is telling your Shlomo, I died, but I wasn't able to die saving other Jews. I'm holy. I'm Kaddish. But you're going to be the Chazan up here in Shemaim. You died, putting your life on the line to save other Yidden. And that's what's happening right now in the heavenly realms. And that's what Rav Gutman told everyone. The father, Robert, said, I didn't think anyone could say anything to console me, but you've consoled me. Thank you so much. And so that's a story that I heard when I was 18. And so it gave me a taste of who this Gadol was, someone who experienced the most challenging situations but never lost his faith, but also walked out of there with a real understanding of the different elements of Am Yisrael and how necessary every part is and how we should all love and respect every part of Am Yisrael. That was my first story that really I heard about Rav Gustman. And since I've heard many amazing stories of his righteousness and his Mesiras Nefesh, his willingness to sacrifice himself for Am Yisrael. Another time, a Nazi shot him point blank in the head, and the bullet somehow got wedged into his forehead and didn't kill him, didn't even hurt him. There wasn't even a wound. Rav Gutman said he literally hundreds of times said vidoy, thinking that his life was over. He snuck out of the ghetto at the last moment before they burnt down the ghetto. Every which way, so many miracles he experienced in order to somehow survive the Holocaust. And it was clear that he felt like this was a gift from above. He wasn't spared stam. He was a man on a mission. And so he immediately set up shop in America and opened up a yeshiva, actually worked with a Chabad yeshiva there. Upon advice with others, he set up a camp here in Rehavia. It's really a special place. You have all sorts of Jews, black and white, colorful. I do my chabura. It's maybe more colorful kippas, the guys who learn, but there's only smiles and only friendliness, and people join in and people get involved. And there's really a spirit of camaraderie here, something special. So that's a little bit of background about Rav Gutman.
And you mentioned that he was from Vilna, and I understand the students of the Vilna Gaon back in the early 1800s left Lithuania and came to this neighborhood. There's a lot of old historic buildings there. If you could maybe touch on that.
Yeah, so actually, you really have everything. You have a blend of everything. Certainly, you have plenty of people who are students of the Vilna Gaon. We have the basic set of the Gra. Serious, very into Torah study. But you also have all sorts of other blends and mixtures. We even have a Karlbach minion going into Gra Shul sometimes. You have the Breslov Shul right next door. And now every which type of Jew, secular and religious, walks in the Shari Chesed Rehavia community. It's hard to put people into boxes, but certainly one of my favorite tours, I get to show people the different Gedolim, people like Rav Gustman in Netzach, and people like Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who certainly was in that camp of the Lithuanian, people call them Misnagdim, but people with big hearts and big smiles and unbelievable stories of kindness. That was and is still the spirit of the Shari Chesed Rehavia community. Since we're sitting in the garden, I also wanted to share with you one of the stories, one of the Maisas. Rav Gutman himself would tell this story about why he made sure that this yeshiva has a giant garden full of greenery. That's actually the other thing that brought me. I love being outside. I love learning outside. So people who like getting fresh air learn here. The story goes that Rav Gutman was pulled aside before the war broke out by his Rebbe, the Gadol Hador, Rav Chaim Ozer Grodinsky. And one day they started taking tiyul, and they're talking and learning. The great Gadol starts pointing out, this tree is edible, and this plant you can eat, and this you can't, this is poisonous. And somehow it's like he was giving him a botany class. How the Gadol knew it, nobody knew, but he was telling Rav Gutman all of these botany secrets. So he walked away very confused. But years later, he understood. He was running away from the Nazis. Actually, he worked as a partisan. And they, at times, had no water, had zero food. And it was only through the advice of Rav Chaim Ozer that he was able to survive, knowing what foods, what plants were edible and what plants were not. And so out of gratitude, out of hakarat hatov, Rabbi Gutman himself would water the grass and make sure that the garden was beautiful because it had saved his life. Now that's one story he would tell. Sometimes he would tell to new chatanim, to new brides and grooms, he would tell a different story. The reason that he made sure that the yeshiva was so well kept is because his wife had gone through a lot of pain and suffering in the Holocaust. But what brought her serenity was having a little bit of greenery. And he would do that for her. I'm sure they're both true. He would tell different stories for different people. For me, it brings me a lot of joy to be in the proximity of a lot of greenery. And by the way, Rabbi Gutman's daughter, she runs the shul and does the catering for the many brises that are here. And so the legacy continues.
We've been talking to Rabbi Kalman Flaks, tour guide and teacher at the Netzach Yisrael yeshiva. And maybe just briefly about you. You were also in the army and you became a tour guide. I mean, I don't think we have time for your whole story, but maybe just a brief background.
Thank you for asking. I appreciate it. I made Aliyah when I was 18, went to Yeshivat HaKotel, and I've been working as a rabbi and as a tour guide. In my tours, I try to bring spirituality and joy into the seeing Eretz Yisrael. I also run an organization called the Simcha Center. This learning program is part of that. But we also have big Shabbos meals, tours, events. And the goal is to give Olim a holy, happy place to meet, to connect, a place of inclusiveness. And so we would love if anyone wants to get involved, Bezrat Hashem, make the world a holier and happier place together.
Okay, Kalman Flaks, thank you very much for coming on with us.
Thank you, Ben. It was a real honor.
This has been a moment in Jewish history. For questions or comments and past shows, you can visit benbresky.substack.com. Thank you to all the listeners, and Shalom.